G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video unlike what I normally do, but it's in reference to the Australian bushfires. Simply for people, I get getting emails and the occasional comment and that sort of stuff, but people who are concerned and asking questions, and some people also asking what is it about? What are the bushfires? Why do we have bushfires over here? I should say amongst all that is that doesn't take away the absolute horrible and dangerous and life-threatening and all that sort of stuff that's actually happening. And our hearts go out for the people that are suffering in the country, in the places in our country where it's happening. And I suppose I should qualify that I don't know how much the rest of the world works like it, but a large part of our firefighting service is volunteer. Which means not only volunteers, that people who go and do this they're not paid for it. They go and do it as to the kindness of their hearts or their moral code or whatever it is that drives people to do that. But also the businesses that employ these people let them go. So that means that business is then no longer earning as well. It's a big community effort to fight these sort of fires. So our hearts go out to them, and it's I suppose a proud thing that Australia is done that so much by the volunteer side of things. But yeah, listen, what I'm not doing, I don't want to underplay the intensity and the devastation and the negatives to the fires. And I suppose I qualify to start off with, yes, we're fine. We live in Western Australia, 100 k's east of Perth, but basically in the wheat belt, which means there's lots of pastoral area or cropping area, so lots of open paddocks and that sort of stuff. And although fires are not uncommon, bushfires are not uncommon, it's more paddock fires and that sort of stuff, which can still be dangerous and still be, nasty in all sorts of ways, but largely a lot easier to control. Because there is infrastructure, or there is roads to be able to get to places, there is paddocks to make it easy to burn back. For those not familiar how stopping a fire mainly works, the best way to stop a fire is take its food away. So you burn the paddock in front of it, or you burn the area in front of it where a fire is heading, and then the fire stops because there's nothing more for it to burn. And we're fairly well set up here. As for Australia and our bushfires, no, not the whole of Australia is burning. It's only actually a small percentage of Australia, but Australia is a very big, brown, arid land. And I suppose I'd like to explain a couple of things there. One is bushfires are very common. It is part of this land. It's part of what Australia's always run with, right down to the level that some of our gum trees, some of our native trees, actually need bushfire to regenerate. They have seed nuts, that actually don't open up and let the seed out until they've been burnt, until a week or so, or I don't know the time frame exactly, but they need the fire to be able to regenerate, to let that seed grow. Which is obviously our land. Australia's been populated for a couple of hundred years, and with the European culture, and I think up to a couple of 100,000 actually with the indigenous cultures, but it is millions of years old. So it was doing things before humans were here doing things. And although it's different in various ways, it still is a land that bushfires are part of how it works, part of what actually is the natural status quo here. So then I want to explain a little bit about what's different. So the next part of the question would be, why is this so bad this year? Well, listen, there's a few factors that have gone into it. I'll touch on the climate change conversation. I don't want to get into the political side of it. There's a very simple part to go with the climate change thing, is the climate has always been changing. There is cycles or trends and ups and downs and all that sort of stuff, and then there is millions of years of climate changing. I could go with the last real climate zone was an ice age, and it's been warming up from there to a degree. But the cycles and bits and pieces, like I said, there's lots of bipartisan politics attached to that sort of stuff, so I don't want to get into it, but the climate change is less an important factor than the actual cycles we normally coexist with. And what I'm talking about there is, in particular, one of the details is when we have a milder, wetter summer, we get a lot more growth. They are generally followed by drier, more arid summers. And then you've got a lot more growth that is now dead, left over from years gone by. That means that there's fire food. And that is one of the things that's going on here. So that's one thing. There's another thing where a little bit attached to the politics side of things, but as much as anything attached to the fact of the way our world works, which is very similar to all over the world from what I gather, is we don't listen so much to our elders, we don't listen to the people on the ground so much anymore, or the people doing it so much anymore. It's much more run by people in cities and people who don't know things, and bureaucracy and that sort of stuff, where we change some of our practices. One of those things that's influenced us over here is in a couple of ways. We're making more national parks, so protecting nature is what's going on there to a degree. And with that, there's less traffic through those areas. There's fenced off roads and things like that. So there ends up being more growth, less people in there, that sort of stuff, which keeps it more natural, but then there's nothing managing it. So both in the infrastructure for getting into those fireplaces to the growth side of things that's in there, that becomes more of an issue on those dry and arid years. In the same place, there's parts of our more forested areas, more bush areas in the greener parts of our country that we used to have cattle, wild cattle or even domestic cattle, herds actually grazing through there, which caused issues in the way of breaking the soil and erosion and that sort of stuff. But the other thing it did was kept a lot of that growth down, a lot of the grasses down, which is once again fire food. So it kept it down. They have been pulled out of there. We've been taking them back out to let the bush go back to the bush. And another place where there's more food and less infrastructure. So another thing's going on there. And then probably the kicker amongst all that is as our towns and as our people grow more and more, there's more and more civilization, there's more and more towns and bits and pieces than there used to be. We have a lot of people wanting to live amongst the lovely trees and the bush and the hills and that sort of stuff. So communities from individual areas to isolated buildings, but more so communities and towns starting to live in places where we didn't used to live. Pardon me. And that means that I suppose I'd qualify that a little bit. It's people living amongst the trees, which is lovely areas to look at and beautiful when they're green. I suppose for me, a bit of my personal background is I come from the wheat belt originally. So I knew about fires, knew about that sort of stuff. I went to live in Denmark, which is on the south coast in Western Australia, which is in karri trees and lots of big trees around the place. And for me, as a young man, as a teenager, it was, okay, lovely to look at to start off with. Then I realised that trees are not particularly my friend, from dropping limbs on things to bushfires that are uncontrollable. To me, I started to see it was like 44 gallons of drums sitting around your house. I started to see fire, fuel, and the negatives attached to it. And whatever reason I did that was my process. So when I look at some of these communities, I do tend to see a little bit of that. Now, I get it. I understand the living amongst the trees, the shade and all the qualities and all the beauty and that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, it comes hand in hand with this other side of things. You're living amongst fire food. So there is, I suppose what I'm trying to say there is that that requires a lot of management to do that side of things. And to be truthful, we're not doing a very good job of managing. We live in the world of, like I said, decisions made by bureaucrats and a lot more noise, bipartisan politics. And I suppose I don't want to get too much into any of that sort of stuff, but it's a bit of a mess. So once again, our hearts go out for the people in those situations, and it's a horrible situation to be in. I think our answers come into our processes as we move forward, and that's whether that's shire councils or that's or governments making rules for people to make sense of things a little bit more. It certainly comes into a lot better management, that side of things. But the nutshell of the video is, listen, yes, they are very real. Yes, there are people in real crisis, and it's a really big and bad situation for them. But largely, the large percentage of Australia we're fine, obviously dealing with smoke and things. For these bushfires, and I should say, we always, every summertime, well, actually living in an area like we live in, a bushfire is something that is Not unheard of. We have 2 or 3 of them a year in a normal sort of sense. There can be more, there can be less. Machinery orientated, just generally where our bushfires start. The arson thing that is really happening, that's another whole conversation altogether. But it's really not affecting us at all in what we're here at the moment. The only place that it is going to affect us and will affect us this season is, even though we are a country that is thousands of miles across, the smoke from those fires will affect us all season. It'll be months of smoke. You'll probably seeing in some of our videos, some of the drone shots in the early morning looking towards the sun, you see what the air quality is actually like. Not affecting us. It's not bad enough to affect in the way of breathing or smell or any of that sort of thing where we are, but in the way of our really long shots will be affected by it. We won't be doing them, we won't have the vision. But listen, like I said, very little effect of ours, very much hearts out and looking to help where we can as to the people on the other side of the country and our side of the country. There's some bad fires, hundreds of kilometres away from us, but there are some bad fires that are happening here, largely all in that same sort of thing, in the greener, prettier parts of our world, with lots of trees, up hills and that sort of stuff. There are definitely issues in those sort of places where the bushfires are very hard to manage. And listen, I'll stop babbling on. That's about what I can tell you. I just wanted to give you, or my viewers, our viewers, a take on what the bushfires are. They're real, but we're not in concern. And the politics and the environment and all that sort of stuff, listen, I think it's pretty much the same conversation all over the world, but that's our take on it. Anyway, thanks for checking in on us, guys. We'll catch you next time.